Every day I drive to the local gas station and smoke cigarettes on my lunch break. I work in assembly on a clean campus and there's no smoking on the premises. Luckily, the gas station isn't far and I get to have about 20 minutes of peace and quiet and decompress. I do the same thing every time, meticulously watching the clock on the dash while my lunch break ticks away. There's a line of parallel parking styled spots on the side of the building, and I pull up there, enjoying my first smoke while I watch the corn sway in the wind while the radio plays softly. The gas station is less than a mile away, but my job is located outside of town in the country, so the space between places is filled with nothing but a cornfield, trees, and a stretch of power lines running high above. It's a very peaceful and rustic getaway, and oftentimes I zone out staring off into space, watching the corn sway as my eyes wander aimlessly. However, 3 days ago, I saw something staring back at me. I don't know how long it had been standing there before I noticed it. At first I acknowledged it like one would notice a tree they hadn't seen before, suddenly becoming aware of an existence that didn't matter, except this tree was humanoid in shape, and by the looks of it didn't have any skin. It was a few hundred feet away, but there was no denying the fact that something was terribly wrong with it. An icy chill immediately ran up my back, triggering all of my nerves while I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. I looked around to see if anyone had noticed it, but everyone was just going about their business, pumping gas or hurriedly leaving their car to head inside. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, swearing it had just been a trick of the light. Not only was it still there, but it had moved closer. It had drifted out of the corn slightly, leaning against the leg of the tall power line it was under. I could see the slight deviation of movement while it stood there, like it was breathing heavily and stopping to catch its breath. Even from so far away, I could see the specks of white for eyes staring at me in an overwhelming feeling of foreboding tunneled towards me. It felt like I was going to get hit by a car or a plane would crash on top of me. It's hard to explain. It just stood there, staring at me. As the seconds melted to minutes, I snubbed out the smoke and did what every other rational person would do. I grabbed my phone and tried to take a picture of it. It stood there while I opened the app for my camera, holding the same stare. As I tried to get the camera to focus, it finally did, and I slowly zoomed to try get a decent view of it, but just as my thumb tapped the button to capture it, it disappeared. Not like I looked away and it was gone, it just vanished into thin air like it ceased to exist. I sat there for a time afterwards, unable to shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The longer I sat there, the more I wondered if I had just imagined it. Maybe the days of lack of sleep, fatigue, and stress were piling up and I was just starting to daydream. Maybe I dozed off and didn't notice. The days had felt so much shorter since daylight savings time. Maybe it was just a case of the seasonals picking away at my brain. I kept thinking of scenarios to justify such a thing, even as I pulled out of my parking spot and headed back to work. I kept looking back to that empty spot in the corn under the power line, expecting to see it again, but I saw nothing. After I punched back in, I asked some people in the same line as me, ones that I knew would also go and smoke during the allotted time and on lunch. I wasn't the only regular there, but I was the only person that saw it. Most told me I needed to get some sleep and stop staying up so late. Others suggested maybe it was just a deer or maybe someone who lived out in the boonies trying to make themselves viral by scaring people in the corn. In the end, I laughed it off, but throughout the day, I was unable to shake the feeling stricken from what I saw. The dread continued to stay with me even after I punched out for the day and headed home. It persisted through the night and it made me paranoid when I hung out at home. And even as I crawled into bed, I tossed and turned for a while, thinking of the red humanoid shape lingering in the distance. I kept waking up and looking at the doorway, expecting to see it. Each time, there was nothing. But the feeling of unease persisted even as I felt myself finally being able to fall asleep. That night I dreamt of walking through the cornfield. Chilly wind tossing my hair and whipping at my clothes. The corn swayed in the gust, a steady dance that moved across the crops. As far as I could see, it was peaceful but engulfing, an intimidating embrace that made me feel small in the vast expanse of it. Dried husks crackled underneath my feet, and the mud tried to steal my shoes. I don't know where I am, and I start to feel the swaying stalks close in on me. Above, the power line reaches towards the sky, looming over me like a sinister lighthouse. I look away from the swirling gray overcast, following the legs of the power line. I squint through the stalks to see, and I see a dark crevice in the ground ahead. Beneath the power line, there's a cellar door hanging open, beckoning me. I wake to the sound of my alarm drenched in sweat. A fog swirls in my head, oddly hungover from a slumber's sleep. I look to the doorway of my bedroom and find it empty. The sense of dread continues to loom. I get ready for work and head in, thoughts of corn and the cellar door racing through my mind. I can't shake the thought of it, and it proceeds to pester me through the beginning of my shift. I try to busy my mind and focus on work, tightening fasteners on the brackets of air compressors and running rubber hoses as the clock ticks away. Even as my hands work monotonously, I feel the weight of eyes on me. I constantly look over my shoulder, but no one's ever there. On my lunch break, I decided to return to the gas station. I convince myself that I'm just being crazy and there's no reason not to go. I enjoy my daily smokes on my break. Just the thought of them sounds so nice. I pull up into my usual spot and light up, feeling the weight ease off my shoulders after the first drag. I sink into my seat, keeping my eyes closed as I ignore the cornfield next to me, telling myself over and over, there is nothing there. I gather the courage to open them and I look to the cornfield. The power line stands defiantly in the corn, and I feel myself sweating as I trace the length of the spire to the ground. Beneath the tall structure, there's nothing. I breathe a sigh of relief and laugh at myself, nearly coughing as I wipe the sweat from my brow. There is no skinned man, only corn swaying in the wind. I feel better having conquered the fear. I turn my music on and a familiar song crackles over the heavy static. I try to tune the dial, but the distortion only grows the more I tamper with it. In the end, I turn the volume all the way down and decide I'm gonna run into the gas station and buy an energy drink. I suddenly feel parched, and the feeling of ice-cold electric carbonation sounds too good to pass up. I shut off my car, get out of the car, and stop. The skinned man is standing near the gas pumps, peeking out at me. His eyes are bright white and beady, his stare freezing me to my core. His limbs twitch, and he takes a step out from behind the pump, a bloody trail smearing the pavement with his footstep. I break out of my fear and look around to see if anyone else sees him, but nobody does. It's like he's not even there. Even as he takes another step towards me, a woman in a hatchback pulls past him, nearly grazing him. His skin is completely gone. Steam radiates from exposed bloody muscle, steady drips of red trickling down his arms and legs. He appears genderless, but his build is masculine, and as the woman next to him gets out of the car and starts fueling, his mouth slowly hangs open and he starts to scream. A scream that nobody can hear. A scream that nobody else can hear. I get into my car and I leave, tires squealing as I turn around in the lot. I keep watching him, terrified. He's going to suddenly give chase and rip me out of my car, but he only reaches for me slowly, like he can barely move. When I haul ass down the road, I watch for him in the rearview mirror. He lowers his hand and vanishes. Nobody believed me when I got back to work. I talked about the man with no skin and his scream that nobody could hear, but the reactions were less entertained than the day before. Those who didn't laugh excused themselves awkwardly. Those that didn't either just looked at me like I was crazy. My shift crawled on for the rest of the day. I was incredibly anxious, a cold sweat dampening my forehead as I looked around cautiously. Everywhere I looked, I swore. I swore I saw the skinned man, but only to see an empty aisle or a part rack instead. People tiptoed around me or avoided me entirely, not wanting to draw attention to my increasing paranoia. I kept hearing his scream, the dry cry of an out-of-tune orchestra, just thinking of it. And seeing his mouth open made my skin crawl. Once my shift was concluded, I punched out and left work without a word. On the way home, I kept looking around, still unable to shake the feeling of someone watching. I kept feeling someone staring at me from the back seat, breathing on my neck. But each time I would turn to look, there would be nothing. Once home, I stayed inside for the rest of the day. I locked the doors and preoccupied my mind with watching TV, hopping restlessly from one streaming service to the next in search of something to draw my attention. I would occasionally peek out of the windows of my apartment to make sure he wasn't there, but would only see the occasional passing car. Everywhere I looked, I saw those damned eyes staring at me. That night, I fell asleep on the couch, the muffled drone of an anime playing from the television. I don't remember when I dozed off, but I soon found my tired paranoia easing into a restless slumber. In my dream, I returned to the corn. I was looking at the power line, watching it tower above me, and at my feet was the open cellar, an echoing wind whispering from the dark opening in the muddy earth. Above, the sky swirls gray, and I look down just to see myself jumping in. I fall for a long time, plummeting through the darkness. Silently. There seems to be no end. In the darkness below, I see a faint red glow, a glimmer of light approaching me. I reach for it, hoping it will stop whatever is transpiring, and as the light drifts closer, the darkness explodes with a sound. The sound of an out-of-tune orchestra. I wake up covering my ears, the sounds brutal and deafening. Now that I'm awake, my apartment shakes under it, and I look around to find the source, only to end up screaming. The skin man is on my balcony, his mouth opened wide in his silent, tortured scream. He places his hand on the glass of the cider, leaning in to see me. The feeling of primal fear swallows me, and I fight the urge to cry. Vomit churns the confines of my stomach as suddenly as my dream ended, the skin man vanished, once again leaving an empty space in his wake. I spent the rest of the night cowering in my room, hiding under the blankets and flinching at every sound. I slept restlessly, plagued by thoughts of being burned alive, my screams echoing over the field of corn. Today I woke up to my alarms, flinching over the thought of the out-of-tune orchestra. I crawled out of bed slowly, my limbs aching from my restless sleep. The thought of getting ready for work fled my mind, and I thought only of the power line and the cornfield. I looked outside and saw the sky was unusually gloomy. My skin crawled with goosebumps that refused to leave, and my hair stood on end. Even in my groggy state, the feeling of being watched refused to leave. I looked everywhere for the skin man, begging this to stop. It has to stop. I can't keep doing this. Today I got dressed and headed to work, but called off in the process. I followed the same route in my car, but instead of turning into my work site, I kept going until I found the nearby gas station. I pulled into my usual spot, shakily inhaling a smoke as I looked at the cornfield across the street.